In this last video on Final Quest, I would like to just go over some common technical problems that I see, some of them general, some of them more specific. And you know, after hearing this piece so many times, things that just don't typically go as well, and I'm going to try to relay some strategies on how to teach those effectively to make sure that when you play this at a contest or at a festival, that your orchestra does not run into these problems in the performance. The first thing in Final Quest is the phrasing. And typically we have a 4-bar phrase structure, but there's a lot of times where we have just asymmetry, or we have something that's counter-indicated in the dynamics where we're ending a phrase and there's a crescendo. So this piece is, you know, to really make this piece work musically, you're going to have to go through this piece and make some interpretive decisions on where you want the phrases to be. Okay, some of the time Daniel Chisholm gives us the phrasing, gives us the indicated dynamics, and we can kind of glean the rest from there. And sometimes it's not quite so obvious, so you have to make a musical decision. Now, a good rule of thumb is, you know, before you see a crescendo, it's a good idea to get softer or diminuendo, because what you want is to emphasize the crescendo, and getting softer helps you to achieve that. And it's the exact opposite for diminuendo. You know, sometimes you want to get louder before that happens so that you can accentuate that dynamic effect. So that's a general rule of thumb. Does it work 100% of the time here? No, I don't think it does. Sometimes I think that there are some crescendos in here where we actually need to start the crescendo a bit earlier from what's indicated. But the idea is that musically speaking, everybody has to be on the same page. So first you have to be on the same page to make the interpretive decisions. Then you have to make sure that every student in your orchestra has the phrasing marked into their music and they know what's happening. That way, nothing is stale. Everything is always in motion. Everything is always developing and moving and shaping. And that's what makes pieces of music interesting to listen to. It's what also takes the most time. And, you know, a lot of the times, these orchestras, you know, their technique is very good and everything, but they never made it to the point in rehearsal to where they could put the finishing touches on with the phrase and that kind of stuff. So that kind of gets left out. Now, my opinion is that the phrasing is just as important as everything else, and especially when it comes to things like tempo and staying together and preventing phasing, if everybody's on the same page phrasing-wise, usually it clears up a lot of those problems, or you won't even see those problems unless there's something really unfortunate going on in the bow. But generally speaking, the phrasing helps with all other domains, and it should be taught as early as possible in the sequence. Now, should it be taught before the bow control or bow technique? No, because you need to learn those independently. Should it be taught before the finger patterns? No, of course not, okay? But once you dive into the piece and start working through it, okay, you know, week 2, all right, now it's time to start shaping this, making music out of it, you know, not just playing a boring performance. The next spot that can be a little quirky is measure 8, 9, and 10 and the cello part. And this is because they have these really fast pizzicati sections where they have to play three notes, you know, fairly rapid fire. A lot of times these aren't clean, and either, you know, you can't hear all 3 notes clearly, or they're not in the same tempo as the first violins, second violins, violas. Sometimes your cellists are going to have to use more than one finger to play this. They're going to have to use 2-1-2 or 1-2-1 is, you know, is more uncomfortable for me anyway, but you know, some might find that to be better, but using an additional finger might make it more clear. The other thing that makes this more clear is if students focus on the second note, making sure that the second note is emphasized a little bit, because that's typically the note that gets lost. Typically it's played too softly and it's not loud enough. And so if we can use a different finger to play the second note from the first note, and we can pull the string back a little bit more and play a little louder, that sometimes corrects all of the problems, and we can start lining it up with the rest of the 16th notes that are occurring. Now, the third option would just be to play the F and the A and the D and just kind of like strum all 3 strings, but I don't think that's going to be an accurate way to play it. I think there's a lot that's going to be left to chance there. I mean, it gives it a cool effect or whatever, but if you really want the rhythmic accuracy, you're going to have to play each note individually. If you have a really strong bass section, they're going to have a blast playing this piece, and you're going to really be able to take advantage of them because there's a lot of independent bass lines. We can see it right from the very first page of the score. Measure 5 into measure 6, it's all basses. You could, if you have a weaker bass section here, you could add some cellos to cover that. You know, they're sustaining, and you might not miss them if you took a couple of them off that E there. But ideally, you would like the basses to be able to come in strong, and because they've got stuff coming up later where it's the same kind of thing. It's not 16th notes, but like in measure 19, for instance, they've got C to D, which again your cellos could cover too. But this passage here, 25 to 26, C going down to that low F, the cellos are not going to be able to play that low F. It's not something that they're going to be able to reach on their cello. So ideally, you would like to get your bass players to play without adding players and play strong so that they can come in and be heard. Those lines are very important. You know, when the basses are finally coming in, it just, you know, the richness of the ensemble just really starts to bubble up, and it's a great effect if done well. If they come in weak, you don't really get that effect. So what can we do to emphasize the basses and make sure that they're coming in? Well, a lot of this is bow control. So what we're going to need to do is when the basses come in right here at 5, we need to make sure that they're playing in an appropriate bowing lane. I recommend bowing lane 2 for this. A lot of times basses have, especially if they're playing with a German bow, they have a habit of playing up over the fingerboard, and that's not good. It's not going to make this project. It's not going to be that sound that cuts through. So they need to play a lot closer to the bridge. You know, bowing lane 2, I think, is about the best they can do here. And they need to make sure that they're getting enough weight on the string, okay? Put your whole body into it, all right? Don't just force it with the arm. You know, lean into that string and really get a lot of weight onto it and, you know, get a lot of sound coming out of that bass. If you practice long tones with your orchestra and you have them stick to a bowing lane and you make sure that they can keep that bowing lane and can create grip on that string and create a lot of resonance, even though these are 16th notes, it's going to help a lot with this section here because they're going to have the technique that's required to do it. They're going to be able to bend the string, you know, they're going to be able to bend the camber of the bow, and they're going to be in the bowing lane that's required to have that projecting tone. So you can take that and apply it to 20. You can apply it to 26. Just make sure that every time the basses come in, that they're in an appropriate bowing lane and that they're using plenty of weight on the string. Particularly in 26, where they're playing that low F, they need lots of grip on the string to get that E string to vibrate. Now, the other issue that we have here is we've got various forms of hemiola, and 3 against 2 can be difficult to get together. And a lot of times what we just want to do is break down the triplets and make sure that the students aren't compressing the triplets. That's usually the habit that they have, because what students want to do is they want to make it as close to the duple as possible, so they kind of compress everything down, but they need to make sure that, for instance, in measure 12, that the triplets in the first and second violins take up the whole beat and that we don't compress it down. And the other unfortunate effect is sometimes when students compress triplets, they rush into the next measure, and that's not so good. So what you need to do is just set a metronome at a comfortable tempo and have the whole orchestra just practice triplets on an open D until everybody gets comfortable playing triplets without compressing. And then we're going to want to mix it up a little bit. We're going to want to have duple against triple. So we're going to have, in this passage right here, we have 16th notes against triplet 8th notes. But to simplify it just a little bit more, I recommend that you just split the orchestra up, have your violins play the triplet quarters, and have violoncello bass play 8th notes, okay, and duple. And that way we can get the 3 against 2 effect and kind of have them understand that before we complicate it even more with the 16th notes, okay? Once they get a good mastery of that, then we can have 16th notes against triplets, and then we can start adding the left hand. But that's sort of how I stage it in order to make that measure rhythmically clean. Now we have more triplets, especially in the andante section. And if the triplet quarter notes are against half notes and stuff, it's usually not a big deal. But sometimes we have triplets against triplet quarter notes, which take up 2 beats, 3 notes that take up 2 beats against 16th notes. Okay, for instance, right here in measure 30, we've got these triplet quarter notes against the 16th notes in the viola, and that is equally difficult. Again, we need to establish triplet quarter notes, so we need to set a metronome and then have the students learn how to play triplet quarter notes without compressing. The whole orchestra on open D, and then once they've mastered that, then we can complicate it a little, and I like to do it the same way that I did before, except this time we can add regular quarter notes to get the 3 against 2, and then go down to the 8th note level and then the 16th note level. So we can stage it a little bit more, all on open strings, and then try to add the left hand and see if students can play through that without compressing. End this episode with the last 4 measures, because a lot of times that doesn't go well, and what a bummer, right? You played everything so well, and then you get to the last 4 measures and things just start to fall apart, and that's really not how you want to end any piece, especially not this piece. So what do we want to do here? Well, in my previous video when I talked about the form and how it can create problems, go over that to make sure that you understand how to clearly get your students in at 95 so that everybody's together. And then now we're going to go into a little bit more detail about what happens after the tempo change, because sometimes things don't go right, especially in the penultimate measure with all of these repeating down bows. So at 95, sometimes your violins, violas, and bass players have trouble finding the and a 3. Okay? And sometimes they have trouble finding the and a 3 because your cello players aren't articulating the 16th notes very well. So make sure they're articulating. But another thing that you can do is you can have them switch to 8th notes, just so they're playing the division of the beat, and they can count 1 and 2 and 3 and they know where the and of the beat is. And then once they get good at that, you can have your cellos go back to the 16th notes and see if they can remain rhythmically accurate. But ultimately, your violins, violas, and bass players are going to need to internalize the division of the beat without listening to the cello players, so that they can come in when they're supposed to at any given time. When you practice it this way, it doesn't have to be full speed. Practice it slowly so that you can hear the exact moment where the end of 3 occurs. So it's just obvious if you're off. And then speed up the tempo. Sometimes when you practice too quickly, it masks a lot of rhythmic errors. And so I definitely recommend slowing the tempo down so that you can be very precise with the and a 3, because it happens in 95, happens again in 96. 97, you have a quadruple down bow thing going on. And you also have a rallentando that's written below the bass part, but in this version of the score, it's only there. So is that a typo? Is it supposed to be there? Or was it left out in the other parts for some reason? What's happening here? Well, I think whether or not the rallentando would be indicated, most people would still probably slow down anyway for dramatic effect, especially on beat 4. Okay, so there probably is a tempo change there. And again, use your passive conducting. So 1, 2, do not give 3, 4, 1. Okay, don't give beat 3. You're not a human metronome. All right, so students, to be able to play this, need to be able to figure out how to play a down bow, circle back, play another down bow, circle back, another down bow, circle back, another down bow. So obviously we need to practice bow lifts and silent starts. Okay, so lift the bow, do a circle, and set. It's going to take that wrist and fingertip flexibility. If you have students that are trying to play this and they're ricocheting all over the place, there's probably some tension that's occurring. So figure out where that tension is. It's probably the bow hold. So have them do some windshield wipers, check for curved pinky and thumb, make sure they're doing what they're supposed to. Okay. So they're lifting the bow and they're setting, lifting the bow and they're setting. Now, if you play really close to the frog here, you're going to get a lot of power, but the frog is pretty tense with the bow hair, so you're going to have a lot of control to be able to set that. And for some of our intermediate players, they might struggle with that. So if you move out a little closer to the balance point where the bow's a little bit mushier, you can set that with and have a little bit more forgiveness in the bow. So if you're getting close to your contest and it's not working out here, maybe move a little closer to the balance point and just have them set and grip, pull, set, grip, pull. And that grip is important, especially penultimate measure, ultimate measure. You want it to be very loud, very intense. You want to end, with a lot of enthusiasm. You don't want it to be a letdown at the end. So you got to get that grip on the string, and that means you have to have time to get that grip on the string. So small circle bow, short bow, small circle bow, and then grip the string each time. Okay, this is a great couple of measures to practice slowly so that you can isolate the steps. Okay. Lift, set, grip, play, lift, set, grip, play. And all of those 4 steps are going to be crucial if you want your best tone there. So that's what I came up with Final Quest, the problems that I typically hear when I'm listening to an orchestra and the problems I've experienced when I've taught this piece to my orchestras. If you have some other ideas and some other problem spots that you have that you might need help with, or problem spots that you've had and have addressed and can give us some advice, please leave some comments in the comment section below, and we'd love to have a conversation about how to teach Final Quest. We'll see you next time.